Seeing the principal, who loves flattery, got a new Jaguar sports car, the school's mischief trio planned a celebration for him. That night, they filled a yellow balloon with paint and hung it from the street lamp where the principal usually parks his car using a ladder. The next day, as the principal parked his car, the school broadcast suddenly came on. Initially, it talked about the principal's accomplishments, capturing the attention of many students. However, as the mischief trio turned on the balloon's inflation switch, the laudatory words took an unexpected turn and started to illustrate how the principal has been an apple polisher, likening him to a cartoon on the balloon, fundamentally bootlicking his superiors. The scene sparked laughter from the students. The principal, however, did not show anger but calmly pulled out his keys, intending to pop the satirical balloon. Sadly, his height didn't measure up, and his jump fell just short. He subsequently opened the car door and stepped on it, resulting in both him and his fancy car getting a thorough whitewash. As the students' cheering echoed louder and louder, the principal felt immensely embarrassed. He subsequently called Charlie and George into his office because a teacher told the principal that they had been seen at the crime scene last night. Indeed, when Charlie and George passed by the scene last night, they did see three familiar faces in action. George was about to greet them when a teacher approached from behind. In haste, George rushed forward to distract the teacher. Spotting the teacher, the mischief trio quickly retreated, accidentally knocking over the ladder in the process and causing a noise. However, when the teacher looked in the direction of the noise, the trio had already made a quick getaway with the ladder. The teacher hadn't noticed anything unusual at the time, but the following day, the principal fell victim to the prank. The principal demanded to know who the culprits were, but George, being a good friend of the trio, stubbornly claimed he didn't see anyone. Charlie, too, didn't wish to be involved. Seeing that his authority had no effect, the principal tried to pressure them under the guise of school spirit. However, this attempt was futile, so he resorted to his last resort. He announced that all school activities would be canceled next Monday, and a large conference would be held to discuss this matter. If the culprits weren't identified by then, they would be graduating early. George's father is the largest donor to the school, and the principal, admitting that he couldn't afford to offend him, let George go first. He then threatened Charlie with the prospect of a guaranteed placement at Harvard, stating that if Charlie refused to confess, not only would he lose the placement, but he would also be expelled. Confronted with his bright future, Charlie started to hesitate. The principal allowed him to think it over and provide an answer by Monday. As soon as Charlie left the office, George caught up with him. George made it clear that they had to keep their mouths shut and not betray their friends or involve their parents. All Charlie had to do was remain silent. George would handle the rest, and Charlie could call him if there was any problem. Considering his words, Charlie reflected deeply. After all, his family circumstances couldn't be compared with George's. This was an elite school full of wealthy and influential students, and Charlie, who lacked a prestigious background and came from a poor family, was able to attend due to scholarships. While his classmates planned their weekend trips to famous attractions, Charlie had to find ways to earn the fare home for Christmas. After school, he noticed a job advertisement for weekend work. Following the address, he arrived at the employer's home. The host warmly welcomed Charlie, but before he even entered the room, he could hear someone shouting angrily inside, leaving him perplexed. The host reassured Charlie, explaining that while the individual may seem gruff, he was actually sweet at heart. Nervously, Charlie entered the room to see Frank, who was blind, seated alone in a corner. Upon Charlie's entrance, Frank relentlessly berated and insulted him.
What do you want here?
Upon hearing that Charlie was trying to earn money for his Christmas travel fare,
God, you're touching.
Frank proceeded to play music on his own. Charlie stood clueless in the middle of the room, not sure what to do next. Then, abruptly, Frank stopped the music and kicked Charlie out of the room. Charlie went to the employer, intending to quit the job. However, the employer insisted that he was capable of performing the duties, as the family was in a hurry to go on vacation, and Frank refused to go with them. Moreover, Charlie was the only applicant who had shown up. Given the significant salary being offered and the employer's pleas, Charlie grudgingly returned to the room. Luckily, this time Frank did not lose his temper. They hadn't even had the chance to chat before the employer's family left on their vacation. Hearing that the family had left, Frank ordered Charlie to help him pack. He planned to take Charlie on an impromptu journey. In the process, Charlie tried to assist Frank, only to be reprimanded.
Touch me again, I'll kill you, you little son of a bitch. I touch you. Understand?
Upon hearing that Frank wanted to take him to New York, Charlie initially refused, knowing that transporting a blind person to such a distant location would not be easy, and he wouldn't be able to take responsibility if an accident occurred. But, facing the irritable retired colonel, he felt he had no choice but to obey. Even though Frank tended to be temperamental, he had a tender side when it came to beautiful women. Even though Frank was blind, he accurately named the flight attendant, which Charlie found incredible. Frank explained that the flight attendant was wearing a British perfume called Frisia, but spoke with a distinct Californian accent. He figured a Californian girl wishing to be an English lady would be pleased to be called Daphne. He began to talk about his understanding of women. He analyzed each part of a woman's skin and used their perfume to infer their current state. His descriptions were quite explicit, and young Charlie was taken aback. Through their conversation, Charlie learned that Frank had two passions: women and Ferraris. Upon their arrival in New York, Frank headed directly to a high-end hotel. He then reserved a table at a swanky restaurant and ordered a luxury car. The sudden extravagance made Charlie uneasy. Charlie just wanted to get back to school as soon as possible to prepare for Monday. However, Frank insisted he stay until they had finished dinner. "I've already arranged your flight for tonight at 10 p.m., and the driver will get you there on time," Frank told Charlie, who then got into the luxury car Frank had rented. Even though he was blind, Frank sensed that Charlie was preoccupied. After pushing Charlie to talk about it, Charlie relayed the whole story. Frank pinpointed the crux of the matter in one sentence: "They have money and status, and you have nothing. You want to go to Harvard, change your life, become like them." While Charlie verbally disagreed with Frank's viewpoint, his refusal sounded somewhat weak. Upon arriving at the high-end restaurant they had reserved, Charlie was shocked by the prices on the menu. A simple serving of French fries cost $24. Frank wasn't a wealthy man, nor had he inherited any fortune. Charlie couldn't make sense of why he would choose to live so extravagantly, flying first class, staying in the most luxurious hotels, even dining at such plush establishments. Frank didn't directly answer these questions. Instead, he reminded Charlie to worry about his flight, as the last one for the day was at 9 p.m., and it was already too late to make it even if he left now. Seeing that Charlie was starting to get upset, Frank finally explained the purpose of the trip. To Charlie's shock, Frank admitted that he intended to savor fine cuisine and wine, meet his beloved brother, spend some intimate time with a high-class woman, and then end his life with a bullet through his head in a luxurious hotel. Charlie was dumbfounded. He had never expected Frank to harbor suicidal thoughts, and it was overwhelming to realize that Frank, known for his volatile temperament, had such a vulnerable side. Charlie was desperate to dig deeper into what was going on, but Frank didn't give him any chance to speak. After dinner, they returned to the hotel where Frank showed Charlie to a sofa in the living room, his sleeping arrangements for the duration of the stay. Frank also walked him through their daily routine, to which Charlie responded with a nonchalant salute. Much to Charlie's surprise, Frank, who was blind, noticed this, yet instead of losing his temper, he demonstrated the correct way to salute. At this moment, Charlie saw a surprising, endearing side to the fiery old man. The next day, Frank seemed to be in good spirits. He ordered a custom high-end suit for himself and another for Charlie. However, Charlie was more concerned about his looming school issues rather than the tailor-made suit. The situation came to a head when Charlie called George, who was busy enjoying a vacation with his friends. George coldly instructed Charlie to await further orders, then abruptly hung up before Charlie could say more. Having overheard the conversation, Frank pointed out that George would surely tell his father about the situation, and that George's father would certainly shield his son, deflecting all blame onto Charlie. Frank suggested that if Charlie wanted to take control of the situation, he must act first. Frank told Charlie warningly, "If you don't act, you might get expelled from school and live a dull life forever." Charlie insisted that his friend George wouldn't betray him, but Frank countered by saying that in this world there are only two kinds of people: the brave who persist in their own beliefs, and informers who look for backers. "If you want a good life, I suggest you choose the latter," Frank advised. Charlie was left in deep thought by his words. In accordance with his bucket list, Frank visited his older brother. The person who answered the door was Frank's nephew, who didn't seem too pleased to see Frank, almost treating him like an unwelcome guest. His older brother wasn't any more enthusiastic either. To them, Frank was an unwanted visitor whose blatant disregard for etiquette, particularly around women, made everyone uncomfortable. His brother asked Charlie why he was here, to which Charlie responded that Frank was lonely. His brother immediately retorted, "Then why don't you take him to your house instead?"
I heard that. I heard that.
As the atmosphere started to escalate, the nephew's wife tried to diffuse the tension by suggesting everyone sit down and talk it out. However, she also fell victim to Frank's crassness. Frank held court at the dinner table, regaling everyone with inappropriate and untimely stories. Charlie watched as he managed to offend everyone in the room, leaving them all feeling downright embarrassed. As Frank was asking Charlie about the time since he did not have a watch, Frank's nephew, who was fed up with his behavior, retorted, "Why don't you get a watch for the blind?" Frank seemed delighted by this interaction, drawing attention to himself once again. The nephew's wife, trying to mitigate the tension, urged her husband to hold his tongue, but this just led to more uncalled-for remarks from Frank. "The way she speaks, I can't tell if she's genuinely tense or just lonely," he joked. The atmosphere at the dinner table became increasingly tense. Just as Charlie tried to mediate the conversation, the nephew decided to strip away any respect for Frank. He insulted Charlie by calling him a fool who idolized a buffoon like Frank, and began recounting all of Frank's past faults and failures. The nephew revealed that Frank once had an illustrious military career with multiple promotions in sight, but his incessant drinking and loose tongue under the influence cost him everything. One drunk accident involving a hand grenade blinded him but left him alive. He was a despicable man before, and losing his sight only made him a blind, despicable man. The nephew cruelly added, "Maybe some people just don't deserve to have eyes," before turning his jabs to Charlie, accusing him of becoming involved with Frank's chaos. Despite not being able to see, Frank demonstrated that he was still a formidable force. Provoked, he grabbed his nephew's throat and pushed him against a wall. This was meant to be a farewell visit to his family, but it devolved into chaos, leaving the family estranged and parted on bad terms. The next morning, Charlie was awakened by the sound of machinery. To his alarm, it was Frank efficiently assembling a gun, despite his blindness. He finished in exactly 25 seconds. At that point, Charlie realized the seriousness of Frank's suicidal intentions. Scared, Charlie attempted to call his employer, but the phone number written on a piece of paper was snatched by Frank, who quickly swallowed it. Charlie thought Frank must be insane and decided to leave, even without getting paid, but Frank urged him to stay for one more day. Charlie agreed on the condition that Frank give him the bullets from his gun, which Frank did. Frank later asked why Charlie didn't let him end his life, and Charlie responded that it was because of his conscience. To his surprise, Frank retorted that his conscience was long dead. He then removed another bullet from his gun, indicating that he had postponed his suicide plan. While they were at a barber shop, Frank asked Charlie why he didn't expose the people who wronged him. Charlie explained he didn't want to be a whistleblower. It was at this point that Frank learned about the school principal's manipulation regarding the Harvard placements. Frank asked Charlie what he thought George would do in this situation, to which Charlie said that George may have done the same as him, but the principal didn't actually offer him a guarantee of admission to Harvard. Frank told Charlie that George didn't need the principal's arrangement as his father would handle everything in advance. He advised Charlie to accept the principal's agreement. However, Charlie asserted, "I can't betray my conscience." The two visited a restaurant with a serene and elegant atmosphere. Frank, using his heightened sense of smell, noticed the faint scent of a lady sitting behind them. Charlie was instantly taken by the woman's beauty. Seeing this, Frank encouraged Charlie to make a move and began to demonstrate his high-level flirting technique. He led Charlie to the lady's table and asked if they could join her. The lady replied that she was waiting for someone, to which Frank retorted, "Some people live a lifetime in a minute." With that, the lady reluctantly agreed to let them sit. Frank immediately complimented the lady's perfume and correctly identified it as coming from Ogive Sisters soap, piquing her interest. He then smoothly facilitated the conversation, making the lady blush shyly. Frank asked the woman if she knew how to dance the tango. She liked it, but mentioned that her boyfriend didn't want to. Frank then offered to teach her straight away. "I'm afraid I might step wrongly," she objected. Frank reassured her, saying, "Dance isn't like life. There's no right or wrong. If your steps are all disarrayed, just keep dancing." His words touched the lady. After Charlie provided the location and size of the dance floor, Frank and the woman hand in hand stepped onto the stage. With the melodic tones of tango music pulsating in the background, they began to dance, creating a breathtaking spectacle. Despite his blindness and being on the brink of death, Frank's display of vitality on the dance floor was no less radiant than any sighted person. Their beautiful dance, accompanied by the famous tango music "One Step Away," became an eternal classic in cinematic history. The dance concluded to great applause. The woman was completely captivated by Frank's exceptional dancing skills. Before Frank could facilitate any further interaction for Charlie, the woman's waiting companion rushed in. He was in a hurry to take her to meet friends. Frank, ever a gentleman, paid their bill, ending their enchanting encounter, an experience that the woman would surely remember. That evening, a driver arranged a meeting with a high-profile woman per Frank's bucket list last wish. While waiting, Charlie used the car phone to call George against their agreement to keep their parents in the dark. However, George had already informed his father. He reassured Charlie not to worry, as his father would handle everything, then abruptly ended the call. Charlie was left with a heavy heart. As George had a father to pull strings for him, he wondered what he could do in his situation. Soon, Frank returned with a satisfied look on his face. It seemed he was quite pleased with the arrangements. The next day, Frank, who usually woke up early, still hadn't stirred by noon. Concerned, Charlie knocked on his door only to see Frank, a despondent look on his face, lying on his bed. With the completion of his bucket list, he seemed devoid of any zest for life and simply wanted to await death in peace. Charlie, recognizing Frank's state of mind, attempted to divert the conversation to school matters in hopes of lifting Frank's spirits. But Frank showed no interest and told Charlie to take the money and flight tickets from his wallet and leave. Unwilling to see a man simply await death, Charlie tried to engage Frank in various topics of conversation. Suddenly, he thought of Frank's beloved Ferrari and suggested they take a spin in one. At the mention of the Ferrari, Frank finally sat up. They went to a Ferrari dealership where Frank paid $2,000 to the salesperson for a test drive, and soon they were cruising the streets. Despite being in his dream car, Frank didn't express any joy. Charlie realized that what Frank really wanted wasn't to sit in the passenger seat. So he drove to an empty stretch of road and handed Frank the wheel. Initially, Frank drove cautiously, but soon he unleashed the true power of the Ferrari. The roaring sound of the engine brought a satisfied smile to Frank's face, though Charlie's heart beat frantically in the passenger seat. Not yet satiated, Frank had Charlie navigate while he experienced the thrill of drifting. As scared as Charlie was, he had no choice but to comply. Soon their rapid speed caught the attention of the police, who signaled them to pull over for inspection. While Charlie was extremely nervous, Frank motioned for him to stay silent. His acting skills were so perfect that not only did the police not suspect anything unusual, they also avoided any penalties. The officers simply advised them to return the car to the dealership as soon as possible, and so ended their joyride. On the way back, Frank's mood once again fell into melancholy. When they stopped at a red light, he could not wait another second. Ignoring all caution, he rushed into the bustling street, only to get tripped up by a garbage bin. The man who once dodged countless bullets on the battlefield could not evade a mere trash bin, and this great contrast left Frank feeling incredibly dejected. After caring for Frank under the watchful eye of Charlie, they returned to the hotel. Concerned about school matters, Charlie called George again, only to be told that George was not allowed to talk to any classmates. This news made Charlie anxiously unsettled. Before he could calm his nerves, Frank asked him to go buy some medicine and cigars. Just as he was about to leave the hotel, Charlie felt something wasn't right and rushed back upstairs. Frank had already changed into his military uniform, a symbol of his past glory. On the table in front of him lay a handgun and bullets, indicating his intent to end his life as soon as possible. Charlie tried to convince him to hand over the gun, but Frank pointed the muzzle at Charlie instead. Frank suggested that Charlie's life was ruined and that George would surely betray his friends. He told Charlie he would end up just like George, and that he might as well shoot him now. This time, however, Frank was mistaken. Charlie asserted he would never betray his friends, standing strong in the face of Frank's challenge. Frank had spent his entire life rebelling against others. Only in this way did he feel significant. Yet, here was Charlie, willing to contest for his own values. Frank then asked something that took Charlie aback. "Would you let me adopt you?" The urgent need, however, was to get Frank to put down the gun. Frank labeled himself as a terrible person, but Charlie insisted he was just in pain. These words resonated with Frank, but they also sent him into a fit of hysteria. Charlie again tried to get him to hand over the gun, but Frank began a countdown. Just as he pointed the gun at his own head, Charlie rushed up to him in an attempt to grab the weapon. Frank, however, managed to push him back against the wall. He regained control of the gun and, seething with anger, ordered Charlie to get out.
Get out of here! Get out of here!
However, Charlie's conscience wouldn't let him dismiss the situation. Charlie began coaxing Frank, telling him that life was just like the dance he mentioned. Even if everything was in chaos, one should boldly push forward. Frank, however, had his doubts.
I'm in the dark here! You understand? I'm in the dark!
Seeing Frank's persistence, Charlie had no other choice but to provoke him, saying, "Just as well. My life's over anyway, let me die with you. Pull the trigger, you pathetic blind man." These words finally pierced Frank's heart. He realized that the boy in front of him didn't want to die, and in reality, neither did he. The reality was that he was just living in pain. There was a time when he wanted to live a good life, but he could never find a way to fit into it. When Frank asked Charlie to provide him a reason not to die, surprisingly, Charlie gave him two. "You dance the tango and drive a Ferrari impeccably." These words touched Frank, and he finally gave up his suicidal intent. After the ordeal, the two calmed down and had a chat on the sofa. The no more suicidal Frank once again thought of his once-long dream, to wake up each morning in the arms of a woman he loved. Charlie responded that with Frank's charm and witty humor, he'll surely find a perfect partner. Thus, both found a sort of redemption in their conversation. Charlie saved Frank from the brink of death, while Frank provided solace to discontent Charlie. They missed the last flight and had to rush back by car. During the ride, they talked about school again. It's here that we learned Charlie has a stepfather who cares little about his affairs. With George having his dad always there for him, Charlie was left to fight alone. If he chose to continue his silence, he would surely be expelled. After an overnight journey, they arrived at the school just in time for the meeting. Frank was not fond of goodbyes, however, the driver opened the window for him. After 2 brief days together, the two had a bond like that of a father and son. When saying goodbye, Frank reached out to touch Charlie's face, trying to memorize how the boy looked. The question remained, how was Charlie going to handle this meeting? Teachers and students of the whole school gathered there with the troublesome trio sitting in the middle, with George's father sitting next to him, while Charlie sat all alone. As the meeting started, Frank slowly entered under the assistance of the driver. He decided to step in as Charlie's missing parents and be his solid backing. The principal asked George to confess who did it. George responded that he wasn't wearing his contact lenses that night and couldn't see clearly, but hinted that it looked like the troublesome trio. He then passed the question over to Charlie. Knowing that he can't offend George's father, the headmaster had to turn his anger towards Charlie. Charlie still adhered to his principles and insisted he wouldn't betray his friend because of threats. This infuriated the headmaster, who made an immediate judgment. George, who claimed he didn't see anything, was not punished at all, whereas Charlie, who saw but didn't speak, was on the verge of being expelled.
Mr. Sims, you are a cover-up artist and you are a liar.
But not a snitch.
Frank immediately pointed out the absurdity of the headmaster's judgment. He questioned the headmaster, asking if their school motto was to teach children to betray friends for self-benefit. When faced with challenges, George chose to hide behind his father, while Charlie opted to face it bravely. Yet, the school chose to reward the fugitive and suppress the courageous. He denounced the school's policy that aimed to foster elite, when all they were doing was raising a bunch of cowards. If they truly wanted to cultivate elite, it would be only Charlie who deserved to stand there. Because he remained unmoved in the face of bribing threats, Frank's words left the headmaster red with embarrassment. He hammered the table in an attempt to get Frank to stop. However, these were merely warm-up words for Frank. What was to come next was the real counterattack on the headmaster. I have personally witnessed children on battlefields losing their limbs, but those are nothing compared to the loss of a child's soul, because no prosthetics can replace a soul. If you expel Charlie, you are killing his soul. You mentioned earlier that your school is the cradle of leadership. When the main pillar, referring to you, the headmaster, is rotten, the entire cradle collapses. I don't know if Charlie's silence today is right or wrong, but I know he is certainly not seeking to betray friends for glory. That's a sign of integrity and courage, the main qualities of leadership. Now, as I stand at the crossroads of my life, I know which path is right, but I never walk it, because it's too hard. Charlie, who sticks to his principles, is sitting on the right path. His future now lies in the hands of everyone present here. If you let him continue walking the right path, one day you would be proud of him.
I promise you.
Frank's impassioned speech ignited admiration in Charlie, and resonant applause filled the room. The committee began discussing without the headmaster's approval. They had the power to decide the final judgment. After lengthy discussions, the final decision was announced. The troublesome trio was retained in school under observation. George, who betrayed his friend, was neither rewarded nor punished, and Charlie was not to bear any responsibility for the incident. The just result again received thunderous applause from everyone. Amidst the persistent clapping of students, Charlie and Frank slowly walked out of the room. A politics teacher, who was moved by Frank's eye-opening speech, rushed up to greet him. Unexpectedly, the first question Frank asked her was, "Are you married?" When she said no, Frank spontaneously asked her out for a date. With a sense of smell keener than that of a dog, Frank walked away without asking for her contact details, knowing he could find her whenever needed. The driver took Frank to his doorstep. Holding Charlie's hands, he expressed his wish to see Charlie again before Christmas. Before the delighted Charlie could respond, the stylish Frank turned around and left, for he didn't fancy lengthy farewells. Within a mere few days, Frank had changed from his usual temperamental disposition. He not only greeted the kids at the door, but also chatted and joked with them. Seeing this, Charlie gave a contented smile. He knew that the old colonel had finally returned. Scent of a Woman is a 1992 American drama film directed by Martin Brest and starring Al Pacino and Chris O'Donnell. The 2.5-hour film chronicles the lives of a distraught officer contemplating death and a perplexed student facing a dilemma. Their unforgettable journey influences and impacts each other greatly. During an elegant tango, reckless car racing, and liberating speeches, both found the meaning of their lives. Frank found the motivation to relish life again, and Charlie discovered courage, not based on authority. The plot is primarily devoid of romantic narratives and instead is a tribute to the innocent and straightforward nature of human beings. Some might question whether Charlie's silence is right or wrong. Many voices are filled with criticism against Charlie for not revealing the truth. However, the film tries not just to condone the error, but to critique the inferior quality of worldly wisdom. The entire film has 3 climactic moments. The first is when Frank invites a lady to tango. Not only does it offer a pleasing dance, but more importantly, it conveys a philosophy. Even if your steps are messy, the key is to keep dancing. Life is similar. What if it's tough? As long as one lives, there is always hope. The second climax is during the scene where Frank tries to commit suicide. From this point, we can perceive his fragile psyche, hidden behind the facade of an angry man. This acts as a natural segue to the next part of the film. Charlie tells Frank that life is like the tango. brief confusion doesn't disrupt the overall rhythm. This resonates with Frank's inner spirit and brings the story to the grand finale. At the school committee meeting, Frank passionately defends Charlie. There will always be countless crossroads in life. The right path is often strewn with thorns, while the rest are smooth roads. But it is only after traversing them that we realize that at the end of the thorny path lies a radiant boulevard. The smooth roads, however, only get narrower the further you go. On the long journey of life ahead, we will pass through many such crossroads, and it's essential to ponder which path to choose and which suits us the best. In essence, as long as we persevere and live life to the fullest, there will always be our unique scent of a woman.